Welcome to the Foundation of Rock, where we're going to be looking at 15 different rock albums over the span of 15 different episodes that are all staples to the history of rock music. I'm your host, Gavin. I'm a neuroscience major at the University of Buffalo, and we're going to all be exploring the culture of rock music. Course of this series, we're not only going to be looking at the most popular and the most recent rock albums, we're going to be going through all of them, mainly the ones that have the most impact on the culture of rock music, and ones that have shifted the culture behind rock music. So we're going to be going all the way from the 50s all the way to the early 90s. So throughout the course of this podcast, we're going to be going over a ton of different bands. We're going to be going over the Beatles, Hendrix. We're also going to be talking about the stadium filling power from people like Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. We're also going to be going over heavy sound from bands like Metallica and Iron Maiden, and tons other as well. We also have a chart that I can pull up really quickly on the all the bands and all the albums we're going to be going over. Okay, so this is our table of songs. Just a little disclaimer, this is just the chronological order in which the albums had come out. This is not the order in which we're going to be reviewing the songs. So although Here's Little Richard is at the top, we're not going to be going over that one first. It just happens to be the first one to come out at 1957. But like I said earlier, we got a lot of famous, more popular ones, artists like the Beatles. We have Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. A lot of popular ones towards the end: Iron Maiden, Metallica, Nirvana, Radiohead. And a lot of the albums that we're going to be talking about are also quite popular. Although some of them maybe aren't as much, like Metallica, Master of Puppets, probably one of the more known ones on here as compared to more old ones. But that's besides the point. We are not going to be starting with Here's Little Richard. Instead, we're going to be going over Iron Maiden's Powerslave, probably one of my more favorite albums on this list. Came out in 1984. And yeah, we're going to be going over that one. We're going to be going over its impact, its culture, what other people have to say about this album, all sorts of stuff for the next following couple of minutes while I have you guys here. So yeah. So to begin with, Iron Maiden was a band that was created from the working class region of East London. It was a band that didn't really make music for luxury and was instead kind of like a reflection of the working class in the UK at the time. It was almost a response to the UK's drastic decline in the drastic economic decline. And they had emerged with the new wave of British heavy metal. And like I said, they represented the working class at the time in the UK, and they represented the rejection to the UK in many ways, including obviously the economic decline that I mentioned earlier, as well as other things like the rejection to pop and disco, which had previously heavily dominated the 70s. And Powerslave, Iron Maiden's album that we are going to be focusing on this episode, was actually funny enough recorded in the Bahamas, which is drastically different from their origins, which was like basically the pubs of the UK. Very different from their roots. They recorded it in a very different spot. And historically, the album was almost like a testament to the language of metal at the time, and that it was a genre that could basically pierce through the very like political tensions from the Cold War, just through like their sheer volume. Looking at Iron Maiden through a more critical lens, scholars like Dina Weinstein have been able to suggest that Iron Maiden contributed very heavily to the intellectualization of the genre. Um, One of the ways being through Eddie, their shape-shifting zombie. And instead of using like images of just themselves or the entire band themselves, they use the monster at the center of like all of their images. And they did it for a like multitude of reasons. Eddie being the shape-shifting zombie on every album cover has allowed for like the acknowledgement and like theatrical like strategy of like infreaking themselves with like kind of how rock is seen, like they're acknowledging and like infreaking themselves. And they also, by using Eddie, were able to like avoid celebrity trapping themselves like their peers in other rock bands. And instead of selling things like sex or the rock star life. They were selling more things that align with like the intellectual part of rock, and they were selling worlds of literature, myths, history as well, which, like I said, even further complicated the genre by showing that rock and heavy metal, especially, could be more than just noise and could also be like a lecture in disguise in a way. So, the song in the album Powerslave that we're going to be focusing on this episode is the epic Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. It is a whopping 13 minutes and 38 seconds long. It is a very long song, hence the, kind of epic portion to it. And epics are usually seen as a very high form of art, especially from ancient times, like, for example, Gilgamesh or the Odyssey. Those are two very infamous, high art kind of epics. And the Iron Maiden kind of brings that idea of a high art of an epic down to like almost a low art genre, like in the genre of rock and more especially heavy metal, which again very like is a strong like piece of evidence towards them intellectualizing the genre of heavy metal specifically, but also rock as like a general. So before we do jump into the song and start listening to what's important about it and all that sort of stuff, it is important to know why the album is so innovative, and it is mainly because of this 14-minute long epic, The Ancient Mariner. And it is, fun fact, based off of the 1798 poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which is a masterclass in structural arrangement. Yeah, now we can jump into the song and start seeing what it's all about. So before we do get started, I kind of just want you to listen to the bass for the first couple of seconds. Kind of just listen to what it's about, because it is very important, at least for the brief beginning. So I'll let this play for a little bit. Okay. So I let that play for a little bit, and you can kind of hear like the bass. It kind of follows like a do 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 do, and it is obviously making a bass, but it is or a beat. Sorry, but it's more so kind of mimicking the nature and like the relentless nature of the ship on sea, ultimately battling other ships. And it kind of drives the narrative that there is kind of like a sense of urgency, like a do-do-dum, do-do-dum, do-do-dum. The ship is sailing very quickly and kind of matches that of the mariner's desperation in that moment. So now we're going to look a little bit farther into the song. We're about halfway in right now, right on the dot, I believe. We're at 6 minutes and 40 seconds ish, and I just kind of want you to listen to how drastically different the music is from those first couple of seconds that I already showed you. Kind of just listen to that and see what you think. So just in that little part, you can kind of notice like the lack of exaggeration and distortion. I think you can notice it. This in itself was a very big risk at the time, but also showed that Iron Maiden was very aware that silence kind of holds the same amount of weight as like heavy music. Um, and the creaking wood, also you could faintly hear, as well as like the haunting bass line, kind of gave like a sense of like a dead calm. And this was very innovative at the time. And kind of letting a song breathe like this, um, really forced the listener to kind of experience the Mariners' isolation, which again kind of supports that they were really at the front in the spear end of intellectualizing heavy metal and rock as together. Okay, so now we are at the rear end towards the ending of Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And I believe we're at 9 minutes, 10 seconds. And I kind of want you to listen for I want you to listen to kind of the transition that you'll hear. It's not too distinct, but if you pay attention, you'll kind of listen to it, and we'll review about that. Okay. As much as I would like to keep on listening to that, we have to review. And I kind of want to like just point out that it kind of transitions from this more dark and kind of crunchy region to like a more bright and like major key heavy harmony almost. And it's kind of they kind of use word painting, like painting the words onto the music, and it shows kind of like the curse being lifted in the lyrics, and the music also does this by resolving itself like harmonically, like it kind of progresses and it becomes more of a harmony towards the later half at around 9 minutes 50 seconds in that like 40-second region. um this sort of storytelling through their music and instrumental like technique is really going to set the blueprint for like up and coming progressive metal bands for years and years to come. So, kind of in these closing moments that we have on this episode on the foundation of rock, um, basically, Iron Maiden was able to reject the shallow thoughts and ideas based around the hair metal scene in the 80s. And instead, we're able to kind of prove that technological and intellectual depth weren't just for like classical music and pop and progressive rock, and instead they kind of brought these elements to the masses. And Eddie was kind of like this idea all just wrapped in one. They were also pros at using negative space, like we saw in the Ancient Mariner. We saw that they used that kind of as a way to show that loud music can also be the same kind of caliber as quiet negative music, as long as it's used correctly. And we also see their strategy of freaking themselves to kind of like bypass and stop themselves from becoming like singular pop stars and like celebrities almost. Thank you for joining me on our very first episode on the foundation of rock, where we had checked out how Iron Maiden had pushed and progressed rock and heavy metal as a whole through their album Powerslave, and more particularly with their Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Next week, you can join me on our exploration and seeing how Metallica took this sort of complexity from Iron Maiden and turned it into a weapon of social critique with their master of puppets. See ya.